Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this event. And to introduce myself, my name is Dan Saladino. I'm a BBC journalist specializing in food and farming. One of the most important things I have to say this evening is about the translations. So 1 is Italian, 2 English, 3 Spanish. Those are the channels. So I hope that's all clear. So 1 is Italian, 2 English, 3 Spanish. I'll be giving fuller introductions to our panel in a moment because this is, I think, a really important session on day 1 proper of Terra Madre 2022 because it allows us to explore this word, this theme of regeneration. And I've been asked to say a few words myself on the subject of regeneration and what it means. And just to begin with, I looked up the word regeneration in the Oxford English Dictionary, just to remind myself of the different, or the variations of definition of the word regeneration. And here are some of my favorites. So, to be reborn, brought again into existence, formed anew. Also, the renewal or restoration of a body or bodily part or biological system, such as a forest after an injury or as a normal process. So just hold on to those definitions for now. But the word for me, the word regeneration, immediately made me think of the work of Slow Food, which I have spent the last 15 or so years documenting in editions of BBC Radio 4's The Food Programme. And also in my book, inspired by the Ark of Taste and Presidia, which is called Eating to Extinction, the world's rarest foods and why we need to save them. This book was inspired by Slow Food and the Ark of Taste. And in the book I wanted to explain the deep history of traditional food and farming systems around the world, now endangered and in some cases at risk of extinction. And my book begins with the Hadza hunter-gatherers in Tanzania, who live and eat in harmony with nature, and who collaborate with a honey guide bird. We're just going to move the images on. Here we are. Who collaborate with the honey guide bird to find bees' nests and the source of their most prized food, which is honey. And I argue in the epilogue of my book that the way forward is not for us to try and retreat into the past and live as hunter-gatherers, the Hadza. That life is no longer within the reach of most of us, but instead to think like a Hadza, and for the world and its inhabitants to live, to farm, and eat in greater harmony with nature as the Hadza do. Which also brings me to the Ark of Taste stories that have inspired me for so long. And for me, in this catalogue of endangered foods, it represents a treasure trove, to me at least, of the ingenious ways humans and communities in different parts of the world have survived and thrived and created cultures and identities and cuisines, all within the natural boundaries that exist on our planet. So in the context of the Ark of Taste and regeneration, it makes me think of a particular story from southern Germany, of a farmer who mourned the loss of a lentil, which was more than just a legume. It was identity, inheritance, culture, a way of farming, and a way of life. And after years of looking through seed banks for this lost lentil that disappeared in the 1960s, Wold Mamel traveled with a group of friends to the Vavilov Institute in St. Petersburg to see for himself if they could reclaim their lost lentil and bring it back to Swabia to grow again. Initially, it didn't look good. It had been filed under the wrong name and was even lost in the seed banks. But as you can see from this next picture, and this is one of my favorite photos associated with the Ark of Taste. Here he is in the Vavilov Institute in St. Petersburg, and he has found his lost lentil, and the joy on his face and the celebration, because, again, what he had found in that lost lentil was culture, identity, a way of farming, and a way of life. But the story doesn't stop there. His story has inspired communities and farmers all across Europe to rediscover and regenerate their lost beans and peas. And in the UK, for example, there are a team of farmers who realized that the fava bean was being farmed by farmers in Britain in the Bronze Age. If we could move the slide on. And so this is why the Ark of Taste for me represents regeneration. In a moment, we're going to be hearing more about what that word means in different parts of the world and in different parts of this network of people who are trying to regenerate the food system. But I just wanted to end this introduction with a quote. And it comes from a French philosopher, Jean de la Bruyère, who said, the regeneration of society is the regeneration of society by individual education. And that, for me, is why slow food has been so important, because it has informed the world through some of the most inspirational stories I've ever heard about what is possible to change in the food system. So I'm going to join the panel now, but for now, I want to ask Carlo Petrini, founder of Slow Food, about the regeneration we need. And Carlo, what does the term mean for you, and why is it such an important theme for Terra Madre and this period of crisis we are living through?
I'd like to start from this hall and say what, for Terra Madre, for Slow Food, for this event, what it means to accept the challenge of regeneration. It means a strong change, a substantial change, almost a rebirth. And then, looking out at you in this hall, you spontaneously can say that you're already the expression of Terra Madre's regeneration, because, you see, most of the people who are here this evening, when Terra Madre was founded in Slow Food, I'm talking about 26 years ago, you were all kids. I mean, how more regenerated can one be? If I think back to the first Terra Madre, and I think of today's delegates, well, you're all young. The earliest delegates are a minority today. There are very few of them left, and I'm one of them. But the strength of this situation and the people you see at this event is the fact that we have a very high youth component, lots of young people. And that means that our association, the system of our association, our value system, the system of our ideas, is already the result, the outcome of a rebirth that we see in the people present here today. And this is a very important element to consider. Why? Well, because very probably this Terra Madre appointment especially in this edition, will become part of our history and will be seen as a sea change in how politics are pursued and how we can act on the economy to overturn certain paradigms and work in the direction of change. Let me be clearer. We have to start from the following statement. The current upheaval of our environmental system and its collapse is caused by this global food system. And this global food system is the first component responsible for our environmental situation. And I'll give you some examples. First of all, two examples. The first one, you know all about climate change, right? Well, this is due to the production of CO2. The food system is responsible for 37% of CO2 production. Many people say, well, no, look, there's transport, mobility, airplanes, ships, but mobility only accounts for 17%. The food system accounts for 37%, and more specifically, primary activities, farming accounts for 24%. If you then move on to the processing of products, we get to 37%. So it's a system that obviously doesn't work. It has to be changed. Regenerate. It has to be changed because it's a system that creates suffering. And the suffering caused by this climate change has only just started to show its effects. And the real problem of this historic phase is that we are, with respect to the climate change, we're entering a dimension of non-return. How can I say this? Non-return. And that's the real drama. And we see this everywhere in the planet. Everywhere we look. Just think what's happening in Pakistan. 2/3 of a whole state underwater, and the water isn't receding. Never seen anything like that.
What about the rain around the Mediterranean, Corsica, or in the Marches, the Marche, the area in Italy, or sub-Saharan Africa, where the drought has made it impossible to have even grass growing. So here we have communities from Tanzania, from Uganda, from Kenya. We have shepherds, so we have farmers who have no more livestock. And even if we were to recreate them, there's no future because there's no grass, no pasture, not just this year, but for good. This is one of the things we have to think about. If the food system is the one that is responsible for all of this, we have to change it because it's a criminal system. Second point. This system, this food system, produces food for 12 billion living beings. We are 7.8 billion. This means that 32% of the food is thrown away. Food that you could eat, food that is edible. You want any more figures? How much food is thrown away? 1.5 billion tons. 1.5 billion. I can't even imagine how you write it, how many zeros it has. It's thrown away. It's madness. And then We have to see how much land has been used to produce that 1.5 billion. How many hectares of surface of farmable land has been used? How many billions of gallons of water have been used to produce that food? It is total madness at a time when FAO tells us that after this pandemic, the number of people who suffer from malnutrition have increased. 900 million people suffer from malnutrition, and more than 30 million people who die of hunger. This is shameful. Shame, shame on this planet. And this gives us 1,600,000,000 people who are overfed because they eat too much. This system is just, it failed. It doesn't work. We have to change it. And changing it means that we have to make choices that have to also have an impact on politics. So we have to accept the fact that the political world is not, in fact, solving the problem. These are the Friday for Future youngsters say this too. And I'd like to add something, though. I'd like to say that the time has come to imagine individual changes that we can develop, and they have to be classed as political action. I'm talking about politics. So there are some choices that can be made. There are some choices that we must make, each and every one of us. First, we should prefer the local economy and therefore the farmers of your district. Opt for seasonal products. You could say, yes, okay, I'm doing this, but it doesn't change much. Not true. It's not true. If these choices become widespread, if we can involve a lot of people in doing this, this is a political movement. And at this point, political movements are not through government policies. Of course, you still have government policies. But at this moment, we have a new phase of politics. The new phase of politics is the one where our behavior, our individual behavior, have to involve the whole community, and they certainly become disruptive. They change things. I'm going to give one example. I'm talking to the Italians, but it's also true for the Americans, for the other Europeans, and so on and so forth. I'll just give you one example. Meat consumption. We have, in our countries, we have too many animal proteins in our country. It goes beyond any reasonable idea. And this has an effect on the CO2 and also on the impoverishment of water. No one blinks an eye because of this. Well, I'm going to say something about here. Changing the state of affairs is something that we can do. We can do personally involving other people. So if for example, the current minister in Italy, the relevant minister, said, you know, it's been okay, it's been fun till now, but it's going to get very hard. Times are going to be difficult now in Italy. I think this is the wrong message. You'll never convince people that they have to change change their behavior if they have to be mortified and go through difficult times. I think that the proteic transition, the transition to move from animal to plant proteins, is a shift which has to be described as liberating and healthy. And so I'll give you one example. In Italy, when I was a youngster, that's a long time ago, in the late 50s, there are very few people here that can share it with me, but with one maybe. But In the 50s, the Italians ate 40 kilos animal meat a year. 40. The National Institute of Nutrition says that that was the time when we had the best possible nutrition, better than before and better than after. Now, from 40 kilos, we use 95 kilos of meat per head, with an increase of diseases due to hypernutrition, cardiovascular disease, obesity, overweight, all due to bad nutrition. I think that a reduction of meat consumption would be something which would help us. It would improve us, and also gastronomically, it would be very good. So this is what I want to say and leave you with it. Reduce waste, starting with very personal choices, starting from the way we purchase, what we purchase. Buy less, but use it all. Don't ever waste anything, so that a lot of these leftovers can become part of extraordinary new dishes. This is the memory of the great Italian cuisine. Were I to think of the great best Italian ones, and I'm referring, for example, to the ribollita in Tuscany, you use dry, stale bread, or the ravioli here in Piedmont. The filling, my grandmother used the leftover meats from the week, and she ground them down. So in practice, our grandmothers practiced what is now called circular economy. Now people like to talk about circular economy, but this is what our grandmothers did at home. We have abandoned it. We talk about it, but we've forgotten where it comes from. And in conclusion, I would like to say, attitudes, individual attitudes, become collective, is the new way of developing politics. A new way to conceive politics is that if on this basis we involve as many people as we can, and also the institutions will have to accept this. But we can't waste any more time. We can't waste any more time, because unless we implement these changes now, we will become responsible. We will be responsible ourselves. So, on waste, for example, let us all try to agree to be in the same wavelength. I'm here talking about the local people, the indigenous Piedmontese people, who this evening are going to go back home. When you go back home this evening, clearly kiss your children, because this is always very good. But also open the fridge, look at what there is in our fridge. For example, there might be some parsley there for 20 days, and possibly you might also have probably a bit of mold on your jam. What does it mean? It means that you're responsible too. We have to involve other people because they change, and we will then have a revolution. Things change, and there's no more time to convince politicians to wake up. The time has come whereby civil society has to do these things, and they don't do these impossible, high-falutin things. We have to change our everyday life. This is our political action. We have to have no more waste, reduce animal protein, refuse single-use plastic, which is overused in food industries, and use fewer hyper-processed food. We have to use basic products. It's something that we can do individual. From Turin, from this Terra Madre, we have to have this new type of policy and politics. Will it work? I don't know. But I'm going to say something. Most of the people who are here at Terra Madre are young. Therefore, regeneration has already begun.
Thank you very much, Carlo, for really setting out the theme of regeneration for Terra Madre 2022. And many of those ideas will be our guiding principles over the next few days. But I do want to look and hear at what regeneration means to different people in different parts of the world. And I want to turn to Elisa, Loncón, Antileo for an indigenous perspective. Elisa is from the Mapuche community in Chile, which is described as Chile's largest indigenous ethnic group, but with almost no guaranteed rights as indigenous people. And Elisa, you were given the role of drafting Chile's new constitution, a project that really came to a climax in a way last year. Can you explain or describe, was that process an example of regeneration? Can you have regeneration through that formal political process of trying to redraft a constitution? And what could the outcome have meant for farmers, food producers, and indigenous food traditions?
Felei pulamien Mari Mari. Mari Mari is el
Mari Mari is hello in my language, in Mapuche, and we will hold your brothers and sisters for always. And this is the way to regenerate ourselves, because very often times, because of our color, because of our language, and the land tells us that we come from the soil. We are children in nature, we are children of the mountains. The truth is that we have a very great mother, who we use Yunus Tuln in Mapuche, which means that we go back to life. I wish to relive, as you have said earlier on, and specifically in my case, it's up to me to talk about the constitution in Chile and how we tried to redraft it. I was the first president, and thinking that Chile was also regenerating its political and cultural thinking. And we came from a social revolt where everything indicated that we were going to develop, we were about to reach a civil war, but in the end, the civil war was stopped. We're talking about the possibility of rewriting the constitution. We still had the Pinochet dictatorship constitution, which was 1980. And this constitution is completely obsolete. And 2 years ago, the people who there was a referendum to change the constitution, and 80% said that yes, we had to change the constitution. With that, we were democratically elected, and we sat down in a committee to rewrite the constitution. And when I was elected, but not only was I elected, I come from a Mapuche community. I speak Mapuche, and we are the most discriminated group in Chile, because Chile, before I was elected, there had never been a woman and a Mapuche who had such a position. This implied that we were changing things great in Chile. This is what we thought, and this is what we continue to think. But on the 4th of September, there was a referendum, and it was refuted because the majority of the Chileans refused it. We had political power and equality. We had also the right of nature, social rights, and the devolving of power. That is to say, what we think Chile requires today to have an up-to-date constitution. What happened? Well, the system of communication didn't work because we depend on the communication media that are also controlled by those who hold power and who don't wish to have the change. So there was disinformation, lies, false news, and in the end, they also used hate to tell the Chilean that they could not approve this new constitution because it was against the Chileans, because the Mapuches were going to have a higher status, higher than the citizenship, and this would divide the country. This is not true. All this was fake news. We came from a process which was a colonial process, and we had 300 years of fight against the Spanish colonization, and they said that we were barbarian and not civilized, and this was a fake news again, and they said that we were lazy and that we didn't want to work, and when we wanted to have a constitution incorporating the men and women, the indigenous men and women, they told us that we were dividing the country. This is not the truth, but in this case there was a manipulation. So when we talk about regeneration, I also talk about the philosophy of life, which is called asmapo in my language, and this means that there's a good land. And it talks about the different type of life, asmonien, nomonien, and tofimunien. They're all different classifications of life. The right life, justice, because you need justice for regeneration, but also asmonien, which means that life has to continue, and tofilmunien, which means that there is biodiversity that has to be defended. And so, as I said, there are the different definitions. We can talk about regeneration amongst our people because in practice it requires rediscovering the traditional understanding of our people. Like you were talking about grandmothers earlier on. These are things that the grandmothers used to do and the people who came before us. So we have to have an epistemic approach to this, taking this, and we have to reincorporate the practices of our grandmothers and of the villages and of the people. And I think that this is very important, and this is a challenge which I think that human beings, as the previous speaker said, is very important, and we'd have to remember that we are children of the land. All the world has to defend the land because this is life. You have to defend life, and if we don't have a philosophy that defends life, we too have to have nutritional practices where we offer first to the land and then we eat, because we know that land is alive, is a living being, and it has its own needs, and it needs us to do something, and we have to do it, and then the land will give back to us. And these practices are very important, and the indigenous people can work a lot with the rest of the population, and this will be important for us in Chile because we as indigenous people work with the remaining Chileans with cohabitating and with love, because we don't want war. We want to live within our land, and we also want to continue to do this. So the original Mapuche approach to land, and this position is something which means that we have to have politics for regeneration. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa, for another powerful
regeneration mean, and certainly in the context of the Mapuche people. Let me turn to a completely different perspective on regeneration, because in the UK, we have City University. Within City University, there is a specialist team of people who for many, many years now have focused on food policy. And they're one of the most respected teams within UK universities thinking about the global food system. And for that reason, it's a great pleasure to be joined by Professor Corinna Hawkes of City University. And Corinna's been doing groundbreaking research into subjects such as food poverty. Corinna, you're coming at this from a different perspective, but what is your take on the word regeneration? And also, what are the factors at play in the global food system, as you see them right now, that mean we need regeneration urgently?
Thank you, Dan, and it's great to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to check you can hear me okay? Great, well, thank you. Yeah, so it's a tricky one. I mean, in the academic world, the word regeneration gets interpreted in all kinds of different ways. So I was trying to think about what it would mean in terms of food in particular. And for me, it really is all about the regeneration of the global diet and what we eat. And Carlo, thank you for your words earlier, pointing out the dire state of the global diet. And that's, for me, where it starts, and the role that food can play. So in the slow food, on the website for slow food and Terra Madre, there's a wonderful depiction of regeneration, which is of a tree. The idea that you cut the branch of a tree, and that's what we are now. We've cut the branches off. We're in a state of crisis. We're living in a very, very difficult context. But that branch can regrow, or that you can replant that branch so the tree is reborn. And I was trying to think about food in the context of this. And why food is so important is because that tree cannot regenerate unless it is properly nourished, unless it has the energy, the resources, the fuel for that regeneration to happen. And that, to me, what food is. Food is the source of regeneration. It is not the outcome. It is not what is being regenerated as such. It is the source of it. So if we are going to grow our branches back as a human society and a human community, we cannot do that unless we are properly nourished. We just can't. So nutritious food produced sustainably from the right sources, good food, is absolutely a precondition for the regeneration of our politics, of our economics, and of our societies. So that's what regeneration means to me. It means putting food at the center. It means putting it around the roots of that tree so that tree can grow back again. So food should be at the absolute center of this story of regeneration. Now, why is that so important? Well, Carlo has set out many of the problems, so I don't need to repeat all of those problems. But needless to say, these problems are very, very difficult to address. So the other point about the term regeneration and the understanding of regeneration is that what we're looking for is not necessarily to recreate what was in the past. The world has never been fully well-fed. That world has never existed. Even in the times when we might have used more traditional foods, as they may be termed, many people were still hungry, as they are today. So what we need to think about when we're thinking about regeneration is a regenerative system, and about understanding that the systems in which we all live our lives all need to be regenerated, and that food can be at the center of that regeneration. So what I mean by that is, well, let me give you an example. When I try and think about this, I try and think, and the work that we do at the Center for Food Policy is to try and base what we do in the realities of the human experience. And thanks to my team who are sitting over there, some of my team who lead on this work for the centre. And so I try and put myself in the shoes of somebody who is living a difficult life, because that's the reality for most people in the world. They're struggling to get by in some way. So to stand in their shoes, and that person, just like all of us, lives their lives in multiple systems. They don't live their lives in categories. The way that our politics and economics is set up at the moment is that everything is in a category. Everything is separated out. This was the wisdom of our philosophers from a long time ago, or our economists, or whoever it was. It wasn't seen for the way that life really is for people who struggle and for all of us, that everything is connected to everything else, and that we live our life in a holistic system. And then we've somehow divided all of that world up. So think of that. Let me give you an example of a woman living in a township in South Africa, in Cape Town, where we do work and we have a project. And what it is for that woman to try and actually do what she wants to do, which is to access, afford, and eat nutritious, sustainable food. She, unfortunately, is not able to make that individual choice because she lives in a situation of constraint. So for her, when she cooks in her shack, she can't access electricity because there's something called load shedding, or because she can't get electricity because she's sharing it with a neighbor. And it's also extremely expensive. So she uses paraffin oil. Now, when she uses that paraffin oil in her stove, she runs the risk of setting fire to the entire line of shacks, which often happens in these neighborhoods and in these townships. So for her, cooking is something that is incredibly difficult. Now, for her child, who has very little money, has very few options, has to go to a local overcrowded school and probably can't even do that. One of the very few pleasures and that very few ways that child can show agency is to go to the spaza shop, a vendor on the corner, and spend one round on a packet of really unhealthy, ultra-processed snacks produced by a multinational company or a B brand. But that snack gives that child a sense of agency, the only sense of agency they feel in their lives. So in this situation of constraint, you have to think about making all of these changes. You have to think about the social changes that you need to make for the woman who has far too much work to do and is unduly burdened with food work at home. You have to think about changes you're going to make to the economic system, which means that she works 2 jobs and still doesn't earn enough money to feed a family properly. You have to think about the role of all of these, the urban infrastructure system, which means that housing is so poor and access to electricity is so poor. So what does regeneration look like to her when her kid walks to school? What he jumps is in dirty puddles and doesn't even have access to proper clean water. What regeneration looks like is regeneration in all of those multiple systems, in all of that aspect of her life. And that's what a regenerative system is. It means making connections between the food system, between the social system, between the economic system, in order that that woman can do what she wants to do, which is to place healthy, sustainable food on her table at home, but she's simply unable to do that. Unless we see this problem contextualized in all of these different aspects, we're simply not going to address it. Now, that sounds a little depressing because it's very challenging, but I do see hope moving forward into the future, which I can talk about next. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Corinna, for, again, just exploring the complexities and interconnectedness of the food system and how that needs to play out in the regeneration that we need. Eddie Mukiibi, we've spoken over many years for radio programs, and you helped me research stories from the Ark of Taste. You told me about the amazing banana diversity in Uganda, which faces threats of many kind of food source, that you've also helped, and Slow Food has helped to be reborn, brought again into existence and formed anew. So again, that's why the Ark of Taste for me is the big regeneration story. But as
president now of Slow Food, and at this particular time, hearing these different takes from different parts of the world about regeneration, what does that word mean to you now? Does it take on new meaning?
Starting from Slow Food itself, I think we have shown one great example of regeneration through the transition of leadership we just had. And at this moment, I want to congratulate also Carlo for allowing this continuity of the great vision he founded 36 years ago to go on, to the legacy to go on, and also the journey we decided to walk together, to go on with new energy and also new ideas, and also allowing this cross-pollination. This is one example of regeneration that we need, not only in the organization and the movement as Slow Food, but also on the planet. We need to allow new life to come up. We need to stand strong against systems which take life from the planet and support systems which recreate life, which gives new life to the planet. This is one clear example of regeneration. I, as a president of Slow Food, it means a lot to have me lead this great movement. Also given my background as a person from Africa, a young person from a poor family of farmers, taking on this great role. I come from this continent which has been the focus around July. Africa was the very big, it made big focus in regards to the war in Ukraine. The war is not being fought in Africa, but all the news we are talking about Africa because of the threat this war has on the food security on the continent. When the pandemic started, it did not start in Africa, but the main focus in terms of food and sustainability of the people was on Africa. This means there is a very big problem with the current global food system. This is a system which we have inherited. It's a criminal system that is built on a very fragile string that if this string breaks in one part of the world, it creates a lot of problems in another part of the world. A war in Europe is creating a lot of problems to communities in Africa, to the sustainability, to the livelihoods of many people in Africa. This is a criminal system. It's a system which we have to stand against. It's a system which we have to change. From 2010, I have been following the economics of large-scale investments in Africa vis-a-vis the number of malnourished and people on the continent who cannot access food, or what we say the hungry people. What I can say that since 2010, if you see a very sharp increase in the number and also the quantities of profits from the large-scale agriculture increase. It's at the same time that we see a sharp increase in the price of food on the African continent. And it's at the same time that we see a very big increase up to today in the number of hungry people on the continent. There is a very big relationship there. We are living in a system which deprive a lot of indigenous peoples of the right to use their territories, to use their resources, and also to manage these resources in a very good way. We are working in a system where large-scale investments in fisheries sector from Europe, from Asia, from America, they come and control the fisheries resources to produce, to take fish, to process this fish in China or in France or in any other part of the world, and then export this fish back to Africa. We live in the system that makes African farmers stay off the fishing, the coastline in West Africa, to give way to European fishing companies to take the small silver fish, which is a great part of the African gastronomy, to take them out of the sea, to be shipped to Europe to produce feed for farmed salmon. This is criminal. This is a system which is creating a lot of problems on one part of the world just to nourish the other part of the world. So we have inherited this system. Many times when we have meetings, when we have big gatherings, for so many years we've talked about rethinking the system. But I think we have talked about rethinking for so long. We don't need to rethink anymore. We need to react to this system. We need to quickly react because there is no more time. The current global crisis on food security, which is now starting to cut across the poor and the rich nations, the current crisis on climate change, which is now a climate emergency. I've been moving around communities in Europe between June and July, and also communities in Uganda in August, and I've seen the real impact of the drought. Here it has been a dry summer. It was a dry winter. In my country, like Carlo said, the grass was also not growing in some places. The coffee plantations are burnt, not by fire, but by the drought conditions. There are many, many problems going on, and there is no more time. And when we talk about regeneration, I don't think we can have a collective action without looking into our individual actions. Most of these challenges, like climate change, we have a very big contribution to that. Sometimes our own relationship with food makes food the biggest contributor to climate change. The relationship we have with food, when we don't care about how this food is produced, when you eat meat and you don't care how this meat was produced, you're giving power to the biggest culprit in the meat industry as far as climate change is concerned. If you don't care as a consumer about where your coffee came from, you're destroying hundreds of hectares of forests in Western Uganda. Because people, now there is a very big growth of large-scale industrial agricultural systems in many, many parts of the country. More and more land. We are in a system that is which is driving a lot of injustices. More and more land is subjected to crops which do not actually nourish the people where these crops are grown. We are seeing a lot of migration. Europe is struggling with migration from Africa, but there is also a lot of migration of young African people to the Middle East to look for what to do because they have lost connection to the land. Corporations, mining and agribusiness corporations are taking all the resources, everything they can. The lakes and rivers and marine ecosystems are now being controlled by these strong lobbies and corporations. The end result is to see a lot of people moving out. I think that is why I'm saying that we don't need to rethink anymore. We need to react. We are losing biodiversity. We need to take action. We need actions, regenerative actions or regenerate actions that start from our own food ways, from our own ways of doing things. We need to start with our individual actions, individual education, individual behavior change when it comes to choosing which action you're taking, individual action against food waste. As young people, we have a lot to do when it comes to stopping some of these injustices, some of these criminalities. And for me, like you said, part of the regeneration starts here in Terra Madre. When we meet here, we don't just meet to listen to each other and to give each other a hug and talk about things and just look around things. This is a point of reflection, a moment of inspiration. Terra Madre in itself is a regenerative action, is a regenerative action in itself as an event, as a network, as a project that brings us together. I personally I've had an experience of standing against a system which is rooted also in our education system, a system that has been instituted in our laws and policies. And I know how difficult it is to stand against this system as an individual. And for me, it was very difficult. When I came to Terra Madre for the first time in 2008, I was renewed. I was inspired. And I went back to create more change from my own individual actions. So that's why I'm saying Terra Madre is one of the first regenerative actions, but we need to share more and celebrate more of those actions, which are out there during these 5 days, but also to continue with these actions and also the inspiration from here until we have the next event, but then also thereafter. So we need to think about these actions and take an action now because we don't have any more time.
Thank you. Thank you, Elisa. And again, very, very important insights when it comes to the urgency of the need of regeneration, and also a call to us all. And that's important also because I want to use the time that we have left to ask the question of the panel, what does regeneration look like? What are specific examples in different parts of the world that we can be inspired by? And also, what is it that we can do, starting here at Terra Madre, to help this process of regeneration build and build? Before we do, let's hear from Mohammed Yunus, who has sent us all a message from Bangladesh. He received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006 for his pioneering work on microfinance initiatives. And he created a way in which the poorest people in South Asia could access finance and therefore good food. So let's watch and hear this message.
Hello, I'm Mohammed Yunus. I'm speaking to you from Bangladesh. Maybe far, far away from where you are. But today, because of the technology, we're together. And we can share our thoughts. You are doing something which is exciting for me. And hopefully what I'm doing, whatever I'm doing will excite you too, inspire you too. I love the slow food movement. That is a fantastic way to look at the world and be active in the world. We have to think differently. That's where it all began with me, thinking differently. Banks are supposed to lend money to people. That's their job. But you do it in a very funny way. You lend money to people who already have lots of money. And you don't lend money to people who don't have money. I said, there's something basically wrong with you. So I created a bank called Grameen Bank or Village Bank. It's a very simple thing. I came to the poor people, lent them the money. They used the money, they paid me back, and so on. People ask me, how did you design this bank, which other banks cannot do? I say it's very simple. Since I do not know anything about banking, whenever I need a banking principle, banking procedure, I just look at the conventional banks, how they do it. Once I learn how they do it, I just do the opposite. They go to the rich, I go to the poor. They go to men, I go to women. They go to city center to do their business. I go to remote village. We give billions of dollars in loans, but we don't have collateral. We don't have any lawyers, but it still works so beautifully. So repayment rate is near 100%. Millions of women borrow from the Grameen Bank and start their life. Collective interest is the thing where we can create a beautiful world of 3 zeros. That's I call it. And that collective interest leads to creating a new business to solve problems without making any personal profit. We call it social business. So social business became a vehicle to create the 3-0 world. What is the 3-0 world? A world where there will be no global warming. Today we are filled with global warming and we are in a suicidal path because of the global warming. It will destroy us completely within a few years. We have been on this planet for many, many years, but we have very little time left after that. Maybe we'll be finished within this century. That's it. Or we'll create hardly get through the century, but next century will be finished. Not millions of years to finish, just at the last stage. We are in a suicidal path. That's the issue. It will be zero net carbon emission, zero wealth concentration, and zero unemployment. That will be 3-0 world. Then I invite all the young people to create 3-0 clubs. Then we create 3-0 families, 3-0 villages, 3-0 cities, 3-0 countries. And that's the 3-0 world. Next time, next step. That's it. We're there. So little drops make up the ocean. And I am the drop. And you are the drop. Start making that contribution. Create ourselves into 3-0 person to create a 3-0 world. Fantastic thing can be done. So I'm looking forward to seeing you in Turin, where we'll be there. And I hope we get a good chance to talk about many more things which we can do. And in the meantime, many young people are doing around the world. So that's what we're looking forward to see, how we can translate this world into a 3-0 world. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Mohammed Yunus on regenerating the banking system and creating greater fairness and better access to food. We are coming to a close with this session, but I do want to build on the positivity, the optimism we've just heard, with one short answer from each of the panelists about regeneration in practice. What does it look like? What can we do? Elisa, can you begin?
So, when I was a child, I grew up with my family in the farm, and my grandma taught me to recognize wild fruit in the bush. At that time, we have water. Today, we don't have water today. But the women today, cooker women that cook food, they went to the woods, they recollect the wild fruits, and they prepare different food for the people, because it mushroom, fruits, flour. They cook with flour, with a mushroom, with everything, and prepare special plates for the people to enjoy that. But regeneration go with the rights of the people, because today we don't have our right to our land. We need to no right for water. One river, people that have money buy the river, and they have the rights. They have the right for the water, but that right belongs to us. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult to the practice of regeneration, but is good. That's knowledge, because give us that kind of food, give us protein, vitamin, everything that we need, and also people can teach to the other people.
Wonderful, positive example of challenges all around, but the knowledge and the wisdom and the skills are still there to be passed on to the next generation. Corinna, a very, very short example, please, of regeneration in practice.
Sure.
Make us feel optimistic, please.
Look, I really, if we look at I think we need to be thinking, what is it that makes change? How do you make change? How do you get that change? If we look at the evidence of what makes change, it's collective action. That's what makes the difference. It's when individuals connect with each other for collective action that we get the collective impact that we need. So we have to see this not perhaps as an individual endeavor, but as a collective endeavor. And in order to do that, we have to be in a situation where we're bringing people along with us who aren't necessarily part of this journey yet. And that requires a lot of listening. It requires stepping back. And so for me, if we're going to think about regeneration, not think about when you're going to do regeneration, an example of regeneration, forgive me for talking a little bit longer than you wanted, Dan, but we need to think about that process of change and what that change looks like. So I'll give two very brief examples. A head teacher who connected for collective action in a primary school in South London, an absolute disaster in terms of grades, in terms of behaviour. And what did he do? He connected with a community to rebuild the school infrastructure, to bring healthier food into schools, to sit down with the kids when they were eating at schools, to bring the social aspect of food back. He brought in he altered the economic, all of these different systems in his school. So it's that place-based approach. And a second very quick example from our work in South Africa, where we are working with a group of women. I say it's run by the community, not by outsiders such as myself. But what we have done is we have taken photos and we have told the story of that community by our lived experience research back to that community. And what that enables that community to do is to understand how important food is to that community rather than to be bludgeoned by it. And as a result, many people in that community have started to become ambassadors for good food in that community, and it started to build from there. So it's about place-based approaches and gradually building up into a situation where we work as a collective, whether it's in a school, whether it's a community. And there's lots of examples, and we need to have the courage to move forward and do that.
Wonderful. You. Finally, Eddie, what does it look like on the ground? Give us an example of regeneration.
I will quickly give two examples. The first one is the regeneration of school gardens in Africa, like in my community in Uganda, from spaces in schools reserved for punishment for those who commit simple offenses at school, to learning spaces that children are happy to go out and learn about food and learn about agriculture, and also to become spaces of preserving biodiversity and learning about the African gastronomy. So that is a clear example of regeneration which we have done. And eventually, the big project, the birth of the big project of the slow food gardens in Africa, which are transforming also the food security of many communities. The second one is related to my personal story, the story of rebirth. Because when I was at the university, I worked in a project that promoted a new hybrid maize seed before I knew about slow food. And I was working in the communities to make sure that communities adopt this hybrid maize seed at a free cost, but they get a long list of chemicals like DAP, the diammonium phosphate, to plant with this maize. And this maize was promoted as a drought-resistant maize in Africa. And it was at the trial stage. So many farmers adopted this maize because it was perceived to be drought-resistant. But we were tested by the 2007 drought in Western Uganda, where all the maize did not grow. Farmers lost 100%. So I went back to talk to the farmers and tried to evaluate the project, but I felt the sadness. I felt the emotions, the disappointment farmers felt. And when I went back to the university, I had to rethink and I had to react. The next time I went in December 2007 to the community, was to talk about reviving the traditional African farming systems that is based on biodiversity, local knowledge, local seeds, and that respects the fragile tropical ecosystem where we live. And since then, I'm working to build more and more communities that are based on this regenerative system, communities that are practicing our traditional agriculture, communities that are practicing agroecology and other regenerative approach to agriculture. And that is a true story of rebirth or regeneration.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elisa. This session has given us so much to think about in terms of the meaning of the word regeneration, the experience of different communities in different parts of the world who are striving for regeneration and why it matters. Please, can we have not only a round of applause for our panel, but also for the translators who have stayed on to help. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing you all over the next 4 days. So have a good Terra Madre, everyone. Thank you.